This is about the relevance gap in business school research, the gap between research done by academics in business schools and the world of real-world managers. So imagine we have two academic papers. They're both high-quality papers published in a top academic journal. Paper A has content which would be of interest to managers if they knew about it. Content B is a high-quality academic paper, but the content wouldn't be of interest to managers even if they knew about it. Now, we can't tell the difference between A and B by asking managers, which of these papers have you read in the original journal, because academic journals are aimed at other academics and they're written in academic language. So that's just not a good test. And the question we address in this paper is there another way of telling the difference between paper A, which is more likely to be relevant, the content is more likely to be relevant to a manager than paper B? And we think there is, and the particular route we look at is so-called bridge journals. That is, journals in which the main readership is practitioners, but the aim of the journal is to translate academic research to something which managers can read and use. And there are lots of bridge journals like that, but many of them are very narrow and they're about hospitality or advertising or something like that. There's a small number of well-known, rather broad journals, such as MIT Sloan Management Review and Academy of Management Perspectives, journals like that, which are dealing with management in general. They're broad journals, but they have this explicit mission to translate. And crucially, they're written for practitioners, but the actual content is academic research and they include academic references. It is those references which we used. We followed the citations and we asked the question, are there any systematic patterns in the types of academic research in the top 15 or so academic journals in management and strategy and organizational behavior and marketing? Are there any systematic patterns which make some papers more likely to be cited and some less likely to be cited? In other words, can we use that citation analysis to discriminate between paper A and paper B? And the answer is yes, we could. There were several systematic patterns, and the first is rather encouraging to academics because papers which had a high academic impact factor were also more likely to be cited in the bridge journals we looked at. In other words, there's no inherent tension between rigour and relevance. The best papers are widely cited and seen as interesting by other academics, and they were also more likely to be cited in the bridge journals. The second pattern was that papers which were covering a broad field, including references in the papers themselves to disciplines outside management and a wide range of disciplines, they were also more likely to be cited in the bridge journals. The third, which is about the general type of paper, was one in which we split the papers into four. There were theory papers about new theory but without testing the theory. There were methods papers about ways of doing academic research. And then about two-thirds of the papers, 70% of the papers, were empirical with data. Most of those were of the type which was testing theory with a list of hypotheses early in the paper. And then there was a small number, a minority of empirical papers which were inductive and very often case-based, in which there was no strong prior theory. What was happening was the researchers were looking at, say, some case studies and then saying, well, what patterns can we find? What did we observe? Now, within the empirical papers, those inductive papers, which didn't have hypotheses, were more likely to be cited than the majority ones which had hypotheses and were hypothetico-deductive, were testing theory. So that was our third finding. And then the final finding was where we took not the whole paper, but we took the title of the paper and the first 250 words of the abstract, and we showed those to a panel of managers and simply asked them to rate how interesting they thought the topic was. And as you'd expect, the ones that the managers thought looked more interesting just from the title and the first 250 words of the abstract, those were more likely to be cited. So what does this all tell us? Well, we think this is a way of measuring impact. It's only one way of measuring impact, which is something that business schools and people who fund business schools are wanting to do. It may also suggest ways of increasing the relevance of business school research by putting more emphasis on papers that are broad, papers that are on topics managers say they find interesting, and probably increasing the proportion of papers that are inductive rather than testing theory. All of that, of course, assumes that the reason why someone, let's say, writing an article in Sloan Management Review, why they choose to cite some papers rather than others, it assumes that that's because they think those papers are more likely to be interesting to their managerial readers. And that seems to us a pretty defensible assumption, but it is an assumption.